The Chicago wind was biting, tearing through my designer wool coat as I stood on the porch of the sprawling Victorian house in Lincoln Park. My suitcase was at my feet, not a travel bag, but a heavy-duty luggage set that contained everything I'd managed to pack in the 20 minutes I was given. A bright neon orange sticker was plastered on the front door. Property vacated by order of the estate. My sister, Sarah, didn't even look at me. She stood in the doorway, her phone glued to her ear, laughing about a brunch reservation. "Yeah, tell them we'll be there by noon," she chirped. She caught my eye for a split second, her gaze hardening into something jagged and cold. "The gardener is here, Victoria. You're blocking the driveway with your trash. Move it." "Sarah, I've been in London for 3 months on the firm's merger. Mom told me the house was safe," I said, my voice dangerously steady. Sarah smirked, leaning against the doorframe. Mom decided she didn't want a workaholic ghost cluttering up the family aesthetic anymore. "You're not needed here. You never were. You were just the bank account that kept the lights on." She slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet tree-lined street. I didn't knock. I didn't cry. My father, who had been my hero once, was sitting in the bay window of the living room, reading the paper. He saw me standing there in the freezing rain. He didn't move. He didn't even acknowledge my existence. I turned around, walked to my car, and drove away. I didn't head to a hotel. I drove to a secure storage facility in the South Side, entered the code, and opened a climate-controlled unit that no one in my family knew existed. Inside sat my real life, not the one they manufactured for me, but the one I had been building in the shadows for 6 years. I am a senior analyst for an international private equity group. For 6 years, I had funneled 70% of my 6-figure salary into their debts, their investments, and their lavish lifestyle, all while living in a modest studio in the city under a sublease agreement. They thought I was the unstable one who couldn't hold down a home. They had no idea I was the one who had been buying up the very debt that held their empire together. I sat in my SUV, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face. I opened a folder labeled The Liquidation Project. I didn't have a family. I had a portfolio of liabilities, and I was done holding them. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number that wasn't in my contacts, a number I had memorized long ago. "Marcus, it's Victoria. The Lincoln Park property is officially in default. The sister is already triggering the final occupancy clause. It's time to move on the parent company." Marcus, the lead attorney at the firm I'd been secretly funding for years, chuckled. "You've been waiting a long time for this, Vicky. Are you sure? Once we file, there's no turning back. You'll be the sole owner of their entire debt profile. You'll be their landlord, their creditor, and their boss." I looked at the house one last time in my rearview mirror. They raised me to be a shark. They shouldn't be surprised when I start hunting. I closed the laptop and drove into the dark, rain-slicked streets of Chicago. I had a new plan. And this time, the house they lived in wouldn't just be a building. It would be their cage. The next 6 months were a masterclass in controlled demolition. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send angry texts. I became the invisible architect of their downfall. My father's boutique real estate firm, Sterling and Vance Holdings, relied heavily on revolving credit lines to maintain the facade of success. What they didn't know was that the private lender they had been dealing with for the last 2 years, a firm called Vanguard Capital, was actually a subsidiary of the LLC I had created. I was their biggest creditor. Every time Sarah posted a photo of a new designer bag, or Mom bragged about their upcoming charity gala, I was watching from my downtown office, monitoring the cash flow. I began triggering clauses in their loan agreements. It was subtle at first. A sudden requirement for a certified audit, an unexpected hike in interest rates due to a market adjustment, and a demand for documentation regarding their secondary property assets. I watched them scramble. My father would spend hours on the phone with his accountants, his voice growing more frayed and desperate with each passing week. Sarah, meanwhile, remained oblivious, still demanding luxury renovations for the house I had essentially bought for them. "The bank is being unreasonable, Victoria." Mom had tried to call me once, her voice shrill. I didn't answer. I just checked the logs of their mortgage payments. They were 2 months behind. I decided to pay them a visit, not as their daughter, but as a representative of the firm. I dressed in a sharp slate-gray suit, my hair pulled back into a severe bun. I arrived at the office just as they were preparing for an emergency board meeting. My father was standing by his desk, red-faced, holding a stack of papers. He didn't recognize me at first as I entered the glass-walled boardroom. "Who are you? This is a private meeting," he barked. I sat down at the head of the table and placed a heavy professional-grade portfolio in front of me. "I'm here on behalf of Vanguard Capital. We've reviewed the current liquidity issues of Sterling and Vance." My father went pale. Sarah, sitting in the corner, stopped mid-text. "What is this? Where is the rep we usually talk to?" "He's been reassigned," I said calmly, opening the folder. "I'm taking over the account." I watched the realization dawn on them, the way my father's eyes darted across the room, searching for an exit, the way Sarah's vanity finally fractured under the weight of genuine fear. I walked them through their own insolvency. I highlighted every questionable investment, every missed payment, and every sign of gross mismanagement. "Your current debt-to-equity ratio makes the business technically insolvent," I said, my voice as cold as the Chicago winter outside. "The terms of your loan require a total audit of all personal assets used to collateralize these debts. That includes the Lincoln Park property." "You can't do this!" my father roared, slamming his hand on the table. "We have investors." "Your investors pulled out yesterday," I replied, checking my watch. "I know because I spoke to them. They were looking for an exit strategy, and I offered them one. They're no longer invested in Sterling and Vance." I stood up, leaving them in the silence I had crafted for them. As I reached the door, Sarah stood up, her face twisted in rage. "You're doing this because you're bitter. You're just a pathetic little girl playing business." I turned back, a ghost of a smile on my lips. "If I am a pathetic girl, Sarah, what does that make you? Because, as of this morning, you're currently living in a house you can't afford, working for a company that doesn't exist, and you're being evicted by someone you once treated like a ghost." I walked out of the building and into the bustling city streets, feeling lighter than I had in years. The stage was set. The house of cards was leaning. All that was left was to let it fall. The morning of the eviction was crisp and gray, mirroring the day they had discarded me. I arrived at the Lincoln Park estate at 10 a.m. sharp, accompanied by the city marshal and a locksmith. I didn't come with anger. I came with the clinical precision of an auditor closing a bankrupt file. My parents and Sarah were in the living room, their faces etched with weeks of panic and sleeplessness. When the marshal knocked, my mother opened the door, her eyes widening as she saw the orange notice taped to the gate, a notice I had personally authorized. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "We have an extension." "The extension was revoked at 8 a.m., I said, stepping past the threshold. I didn't look at the decor I had paid for, or the furniture I had kept in storage for them. I looked at the legal documents in my hand, The property is now under full control of Vanguard Capital, and as the primary shareholder, I am initiating immediate repossession. My father stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Victoria? This is a mistake. We're your family. I held up a document, the same one I had framed in my apartment, the one where they had legally severed me from their lives 10 years ago, to avoid complications with their business dealings. You chose this outcome a decade ago, I said calmly. I'm simply honoring the contract you wrote. Sarah tried to protest, her voice rising in hysteria. You can't do this to us. You're just a puppet of the firm. Actually, I replied, pulling the final liquidation papers from my portfolio. I am the firm. Every asset, every ledger, and every square inch of this property belongs to me. And as of this moment, you are trespassing. The marshal stepped forward, and for the first time my father went silent. He looked at me, not with the arrogance of a patriarch, but with the hollow look of a man who finally realized his daughter was the only thing standing between him and total ruin, and that she was no longer interested in helping. They were given 30 minutes to pack their personal belongings. I stood in the foyer, watching them scramble like strangers in their own home. Sarah was sobbing, clutching bags of clothes, while my mother looked at me with a mixture of hatred and profound confusion. As they reached the door, Sarah stopped and looked back. You'll never be happy, Victoria. You're just as cold as they said you were. I'm not cold, Sarah, I said, watching them walk out into the cold Chicago air. I'm just solvent. They didn't have a place to go, but that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had ensured that all their assets were liquidated according to the law, leaving them with exactly what they had left me with. Nothing. By the afternoon, the locks were changed. The house was finally quiet. Truly quiet. I walked into what used to be the guest room, where they had shoved my things years ago. It was empty now, clean and stripped of their influence. I sat on the floor, the weight of the last 6 years finally lifting. I didn't take the empire to be cruel. I took it because it was a structure built on a lie, and every architect knows that if you want to build something lasting, you have to tear down the rotten foundation first. I pulled out my phone and sent one final email to my lawyer, confirming the closure of the LLCs and the transition of the deeds into a charitable trust dedicated to architectural preservation, a final irony they would never understand. I was free. I had started as a whisper in their world, but I was ending as the force that reshaped it. And for the first time in my life, the house wasn't just a place I lived. It was a testament to the fact that I had finally, fully belonged to myself.